everyone, Miss Meek here with a 5th grade review over adding and subtracting fractions. Adding and subtracting fractions. So one of the key things here about adding and subtracting fractions is if you do not have a strong fraction game, meaning that you don't have a really strong understanding about equivalent fractions and that 1/2 is also 2/4, which is also 3/6, which is also 6/12. If you don't have that really strong connection with fractions, and it's okay if you don't, the main thing that you have got to get down is you have to find a common denominator. So we're going to take a look at a couple of examples of how this works. So we're going to start off by talking about adding fractions. So if fractions have the same denominator, like in number 1, 6's and 6's, I can just add those fractions together. The reason why is because 1/6 and 4/6 are the same size pieces. So if you were thinking about you were trying to add puzzle pieces to a box, you wouldn't want to have huge puzzle pieces and baby puzzle pieces all in the same box. You would want to have puzzle pieces that are the same size. 6's are the same size. And because of that, I can just add these together. And so I just add the tops together, 1 + 4, which is 5, and the size of the piece is a 1/6. So 5/6 would be my final answer. Now, they're not always that easy. What if the denominators don't match? So take a look at number 2. When the denominators don't match, we have 1/5 + 3/10. They're not the same size pieces. Okay, you have 5ths, which are a slightly bigger piece, and you have 10ths, which is a slightly smaller piece. In order to add these two fractions together, we have to make them be the same size pieces. And so to do that, I have to think about a common denominator, meaning what is a number that maybe I could multiply 5 by in order to make it equal a 10? Well, I know that 5 times 2 equals 10. And so I'm going to multiply 1/5 times 2, and when I do that, I actually get 2/10. Well, now I have matching denominators, and so now I can add these two fractions together. When I do that, I have 2 + 3, which is 5, and the size of the piece is now a 1/10. Now, what's really crazy about 5/10 is it is not in lowest terms. It is not a simplified fraction, and we have to simplify our fractions. So the way that I do that is I think, is there an equivalent fraction that is in lowest terms? Another way that I can think about that is what is a common number I can divide 5 and 10 by? Well, I know that 5 divided by 5 will give me 1. And I also know that 10 can be divided by 5 as well, and that gives me 2. So my actual simplified final answer, lowest term fraction, is going to be 1/2 for number 2. For number 3, take a look at this one. I have common denominators. Great, I can just add the numbers together. When I do that, I get 1 + 4, which is 5, and the size of the piece is 4ths, so that 4 stays on the bottom. But if you take a look at this fraction, it's kind of wonky looking. The top number is bigger than the bottom number. That is called an improper fraction. That means that our fraction has become greater than 1. And so we have to pull that 1 out. All right? And so I am going to pull out that 1. So how many times does 4 go into 5? 1 time. And when we do that, there's actually going to be 1/4 left. And so my final answer is 1 1/4. In case you're wondering what I just did, what I technically did is I divided. I asked myself, how many times does 4 go into 5? 1 time. And how many pieces are left over? 1. And so that's going to be 1 whole right here, 1 whole. This is your whole number. This is the part left over, so that's going to be your numerator. And the size of the piece, that's your denominator. So that is where those numbers came from. Now the last one is the hardest one, number 4, 1/2 + 3/7. I know nothing times 2 is going to give me 7, and I know that because one's even and one's odd, and so I'm going to have to come up with a brand new number that both of them could multiply to. when I really think about it, the closest or the soonest number that they have in common, the least common denominator, or the least common factor that they have together, their least common multiple, sorry, I'll get it right eventually. The least common multiple that they have is going to be 14. So what that means is that I'm going to have to multiply this 1/2 times 7 to get 14ths. And then I'm going to have to multiply this 3/7 times 2, and that's going to give me my 14ths for the 3/7. And so now I have matching denominators. And I can add these together, and I get 7 plus 6, which is 13, and the size piece is 14ths. I check the fraction. It is in lowest terms, and so that will be my final answer. All right, let's take a look at some subtracting examples. So for subtracting fractions, it's exactly the same process. We have to make sure that we have either common denominators, or we have to find a common denominator. So let's take a look at the first one. Number 1, nice and easy. The denominators are the same, which makes things super nice and friendly for us. So that means that we just subtract the top. 4 minus 1 is 3, and the size of the piece is fifths, so 3/5. Okay, we do not subtract the bottoms. Number 2, okay, so I have 1/2 and I have 1/4, so a little trickier, okay? We want to get a common denominator. I know that 2 times 2 is 4, and so that will get me my common denominator fairly quickly. I multiply that 1/2 times 2, so I end up with 2/4, and so my new problem is 2/4 minus 1/4. 2/4 is the equivalent fraction for 1/2. 4/4, if that makes sense. And now we can subtract. 2 minus 1 is 1. And then what size pieces they are? They're fourths. And so we get 1/4. Again, as we go through these, make sure you check your final answers that they're in lowest term, or the most simplified fraction that you can get. This next one is kind of weird. This guy right here is called a mixed number, meaning that it has a whole number and a fraction smushed together, combined together. It also means that that fraction is over 1. So I have 1 whole and I have 3/4 together. So when I go to work with a mixed number like that, I have to turn it into an improper fraction. It makes things a lot easier. Now you don't have to. If you have a very good, very strong fraction understanding, you don't have to do this. However, sometimes we get confused, and so it makes it a lot easier if we just turn it into an improper fraction, find a common denominator, and then subtract them. So remember that what you have here is technically 1 plus 3/4. Okay, this 1 right here, we could change it out for not 1 whole, but 4/4. 4/4 is the same as 1. And it has the denominator that matches our 3/4. When I add those together, common denominators, I get 4 plus 3, which is 7. The size piece is fourths. So this, as an improper fraction, is 7/4. Now, that doesn't help me too much because I still have a 4, I have fourths and I have a third. So fourths, 4 and 3, not the same denominator. So let me think, what is a common number that I could multiply and get 4/2 and 3/2? So the least common, multiple is what I'm thinking of. And when I think about that, I think it is 12. So I am going to multiply my 7/4 times 3. I'm going to multiply my 1/3 times 4, and I'm going to end up with 12s. So 3 times 7 is 21/12, minus 1 times 4 is 4/12. And so my final problem that I'm going to solve here is 21/12 minus 4/12. Well, 21 minus 4 is 17. The size piece is 12ths. I'm left with an improper fraction. That means that there is a whole number inside of that fraction, and we have to pull it out to make it be in simplified terms. And so I ask myself, how many times does 12 fit into 17? Well, 12 can go into 17 one time. And how many are left over? well, there will be 5 pieces left over. So my mixed number there is going to be 1 and 5/12. Again, if you can't do what I just did in my head, what I'm technically doing is a little division problem. I'm asking myself, how many times does 12 go into 17? 1 time. How many are going to be left over? 5. And that's the piece of the fraction that I have. So that's my numerator. Our last one here, again, doesn't have a common denominator. They also cannot multiply to equal each other. So I have to think of a least common multiple, some number that both of them can multiply to that can get me a common denominator. When I think about that, I think of 12ths actually. So we're going to go with 12ths again. I can do 6 times 2 and I can get my 12ths on the bottom there. Remember, whatever you do to the bottom, you also have to do to the top, which is why I multiply the 5 times 2 and the 6 times 2. And then to get my 4 to 12ths, I multiply it times 3. Once I have those common denominators, once again, 10 minus 9 is 1, and the size piece is a 12th. All right, that was a recap, kind of a long recap, of subtracting and adding fractions. I hope that this helps, and we will be talking to you soon.